The next day he did return with more questions, these ones very specific. He wanted to know about the vampires of Eastern Skyrim. I told him about the most powerful tribe, the Volkihar, paranoid and cruel, whose very breath could freeze their victims' blood in their veins. I explained to him how they lived beneath the ice of remote and haunted lakes, never venturing into the world of men, except to feed. Skyrim has a general stylistic unity to its world design. Its towering arched ruins, its bleak color palette, and overall colossal atmosphere lend well to a sense of wandering through a world of long-past legends and grandeur. Although the game has a few elements that don't meet this standard, like some of the mundane designs of the NPCs and the occasional lackluster city architecture, there's an underlying level of gravitas embedded in most of the aspects of Skyrim's visual tone. But for all the artistic inspiration that this game can convey, there is one specific element that underwhelmed me the most, that being the presentation of the Volkihar vampires of the Dawnguard DLC. When I think of the possibilities of what a Nordic vampire could be, I imagine imagery of deep ice caverns beneath the frozen sea, aged beings with white hair and terrifying gaunt features. I imagine customs and blood rites so ancient that they can scarcely be understood by modern mortals. However, when I played through the DLC, I was met with dark-haired aristocrats, billowing satin sleeves, political squabbling socialites, and dialogue filled with modern irreverence, not ancient prose. In short, I'm not thrilled with the direction they decided to take the Volkihar in the Dawnguard expansion, so I'm going to make a redesign that is in line with what I believe to be a more cohesive representation of an ancient Nordic vampire clan. My previous Elder Scrolls designs have been faithful to the lore, and I tried my best to work within the bounds of canon as much as possible. However, for this video, I would like to do something more akin to a complete rework of the subject, sort of a what-if scenario. So, let's get to work and understand what the Volkihar could have been, and set out to design a style of ancient Nordic vampire that does the children of Kine proud. Before we put paint to board, I want to clarify a few things about the Volkihar regarding their presentation in game. Back in 2011, after the first release of Skyrim, Bethesda Game Studios held a game jam in which they allowed the developers to more or less work on whatever they wanted in regards to adding new features to the game. Many of these features would go on to be added in future updates and add-ons, including a new combat mode, the Vampire Lord form, and its accompanying perk tree. This game jam was surely a good means of expanding the creativity of Skyrim's future at the time. However, I have the suspicion that this may have had what I consider to be some negative consequences in relation to the design of the Volkihar. You see, when this Vampire Lord form was created, it was done so with unfettered possibility and creative expression as the goal, which at face value is a noble cause. But when these creations actually get added to the game, they should do so in a manner that doesn't compromise what's already there. It seems clear to me, with the admission that I can't be sure what was going on in the heads of the developers, that someone in charge saw the Vampire Lord form, liked it, and decided to make an expansion with vampires as the central theme as a result. And the Volkihar are just that, vampires. They're presented in accordance with most of the common tropes associated with classic vampires from pop culture to Dracula. Harkon himself is a slick-haired nobleman with a black cape and villainous goatee, while Serana looks like a modern influencer doing a goth cosplay. Despite being ancient, thousands of years old depending on how you interpret the lore, they dress and style themselves in a manner that looks even more modern than that of the contemporary Nords. Their buckled boots and laced vests look more 17th century than ancient Nordic. We already have a visual standard for what the progenitor Nordic culture looked like, so why does this clan stray so far from that aesthetic? Their entire material culture is questionable given what we know of their circumstances. We see them using many exotic materials and ingredients, despite the fact that they live in an isolated castle and don't engage in trade. They have a multi-ethnic configuration despite ancient Nordic distrust of elves, and general unlikelihood of cultural interaction given vampiric obsession with bloodline purity. I know that reasons can be given and extrapolated that justify many aspects of their in-game presentation, But why choose a style that requires so much retconning and straining of believability when the simpler solution would be to make them look truly Nordic in tone? Ultimately, it seems they were dead set on going in the pop culture direction with their vampire DLC, and any inconsistencies regarding this approach weren't considered important in the end. I think that's a bit of a shame, so let's look at what a true Nord vampire clan could really look like to start the concept for our redesign. One thing I love about Elder Scrolls lore is the way they take existing fantasy tropes and turn them on their heads and/or reimagine a tweak to the original premise. For example, wood elves in fantasy media are typically presented as tree-loving minstrels who protect their forests at all costs. This stereotype is also true of the Bosmer. However, their stewardship of nature extends to the point of not interfering with plant matter at all, resulting in tribes of elves who exclusively use animal parts, eating a wholly carnivorous diet, and even resorting to cannibalism to prevent wasted meat. Vampirism in the Elder Scrolls has a similar twist on the classic tropes. When a person afflicted with vampirism feeds, they typically revert further back to their mortal presentation. This means that vampires, with some exceptions, gain power the longer they starve themselves of mortal blood. The Daedric Prince of Domination and Lord of Cold Harbor, Molag Bal, gifted vampirism to mortals in a manner that resulted in his demonic essence permanently altering those afflicted with great powers and diminutive abilities. The more a vampire feeds on mortals, the less of a connection they have to these abilities. For any who may not know, the clan name Volkihar was not invented for the sake of the Dawnguard expansion. The endgame book titled Immortal Blood predates the Elder Scrolls V itself, and it describes a few different forms of vampirism throughout the provinces of Tamriel. This book was written by an anonymous author, and its words are subject to debated validity, but there are a few interesting tidbits we can learn about the Volkihar from it nonetheless. Unlike the aristocratic vampires we see of Harkon's court and game, Immortal Blood describes an ancient clan of eastern Skyrim whose very breath freezes their victims' blood. Isolationists who live beneath frozen water and can phase through the ice like mist to grab their victims. Their description here is much more in line with what we understand of ancient Nordic culture, from their nature-inspired magic to their cold-dwelling reclusiveness. It's this description that will serve as a basis for our redesign. We can conceptualize that they have isolated themselves to progress further and further toward a monstrous state by starving themselves of blood, before the events of the plot finally cause them to awaken again. I'd like to imagine them as having a material culture that is more based on barbarian clans as opposed to courtly palatial life. The clan would dwell for centuries in carved-out glaciers in the Sea of Ghosts. They could even use their own forms of the Thu'um, like the other ancient Nords, only with more frost and undeath themes. This would work well with the notion of their breath freezing their victims, but with a cold whispered word of the dragon tongue. Like the clever men of old, they would not shun magic but embrace its power as a means of growing in strength. They could be one with the snows and frigid winds of their environment by casting powerful frost spells and merging with the ice. The combination of their Nordic blood, mixed with the undeath of vampirism, would result in a clan that had total immunity to the cold. Their skin turned blue and their hair as white as the deep snows of their northern habitat, walking barefoot and primal, unhindered by the unforgiving temperature. The entire clan would consist of Nords, who were involved in the original ceremonies that gifted them their curse and their closest related offspring to keep the bloodline of the clan strong. They would hunt the creatures of Skyrim's northern coast, such as horkers and snowbears, and they would use their parts for their apparel and tools. Chorus chitin and membranes could be made into decorative pearlescent jewelry and weaponry. The Volkihar would have little need for armor due to their strong vampiric resistance to conventional damage. When attacking a victim, they could morph into a more monstrous form, much like the Lord form we see in the game. Instead of clashing swords in conventional battle, they would extend their claws before reforming as a mist that phases through their enemies, ripping them apart while nearly invisible and with deadly speed. The weapons they craft wouldn't conform to the functional needs of fencing, instead focused on delivering devastating attacks that swipe through their opponents too slow to react. Their garb would be minimal, as they don't need clothing for warmth. Jewelry and adornment in line with a Nordic sense of bravado would take precedence over practicality. Trophies of horker tusks and chorus pincers would be affixed upon ceremonial armors used in blood rituals and sacrificial offerings to Molag Bal. They would worship the Daedric Prince in accordance with the summoning days related to the celestial calendar, and do his bidding by leaving isolation to capture mortal souls. In exchange, Baal would gift them with conjuration summons from his realm of Cold Harbor. With the aid of their patron, the Volkihar would summon Frost Atronachs and Dromora, and with their talents of necromancy, gargoyles sculpted of ice would be brought to life as servants along with the corpses of their enemies and reanimated wildlife. Overall, the aesthetic vibe of the Volkihar should have the look of a clan torn between the natural majesty of the skyborn children of Kine mixed with the corruptive and demonic influence of Molag Bal, as if their visual premise is being molded and fought over by the two deities. Now that I've laid out my premise for the redesign, I'd like to make an illustration of Serana and Harkon reconceptualized from the ground up. My goal isn't to list out a full rewrite of the plot of the DLC or anything like that. I merely want to remake the two main Volkihar characters in a new style for the sake of the visual experiment. Serana seems very modern in her cadence and style, so let's make her look more primitive in an attempt to evoke a more ancient grounding to her aesthetic. Both her and her father will have blue skin and white hair to immediately showcase to the viewer their cold lack of mortality. Their garb will be made of horker and whale skins, and materials like glass, silver, and Nordic steel will be more minimal, being constructed from the spoils taken from their victims. Chorus hunter wings could add incandescent accents and adornment as well. Serana is a near master of necromancy and a proficient spellcaster, so I want some details like a blood potion vial, bone hawk talisman, and enchanted jewelry to help convey that. She could also have scarring patterns trace her skin, the results of blood rituals and Daedric pacts. She isn't a person concerned with morals in the same way a mortal hero would be, but she is far less malicious than her father, and has a more pragmatic view of her clan's ambitions. I will depict her carrying the Elder Scroll central to her involvement in the story, wrapped in a silk cover while she shows apprehension at the notion of returning it to her overly ambitious father. Harkon's design will embody the fullest extent of the Nordic understanding of masculinity, mixed with a bit of self-destructive desire for power. His overall design is inspired by Frank Frazetta Conan the Barbarian illustrations, as the half-naked look emphasizes Harkon's primal demeanor, unfettered by pragmatic restraint. His plan to literally blot out the sun is a bit silly if we're being honest. However, when we reimagine him in a more traditional Nordic light, I can imagine the legendary deed mentality of the Nords leading to a desire to leave his mark on the world through great and terrible work, regardless of the consequences. Like he wants to be a legend at any cost. His obsession with prophecy and greatness would result in a more disheveled appearance and monstrous visage. While Serana maintains a bit of pinkness in her skin, Harkon's face is cold and devoid of mortal warmth altogether. His belt would be adorned with tusks shaped to mimic the face of Molag Bal as depicted on his shrines. Bands of decorative steel frame the muscles of his arms as a sign of power. A strand of pendants would be worn across the chest to visually widen his shoulders and display the medals and scavenged sigils of those who have tried and failed to kill him in his many years of undeath. I hope you've enjoyed my process. This has been my most divergent redesign to date, so I hope you all like the final result. I actually like the Dawnguard DLC quite a bit, as it provided some of my fondest memories with the game. I don't want to give the impression that I despise what Bethesda have created here. I only wanted to give my take on a visual element that I thought should have been better interwoven within the existing framework of Skyrim. If you like this sort of thing, I have other Elder Scrolls redesigns, as well as videos on other fantasy topics, creatures, armor, historical inspirations, that sort of thing. So stay tuned if that interests you. Thank you for watching.